The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal gardens of New Eden. Marcus Chen walked slowly through the paths, his bare feet feeling the warm stone beneath them. He stopped to touch a flower that glowed with soft blue light. The plant responded to his touch, its petals opening wider and releasing a sweet smell into the air. Marcus was a cultivator, like all humans had been for the past 3,000 years. His people had long ago given up the old ways of anger and violence. They spent their days growing beautiful things, creating art, and thinking deep thoughts about the universe. War was something they only read about in old history books, like a bad dream from humanity's childhood. The city around him was a wonder to see. Buildings grew from the ground like living trees, their walls breathing and changing color with the seasons. Flying vehicles moved silently through the air, powered by clean energy that never harmed the environment. Children laughed as they played, in parks where gravity was lighter, letting them jump and float like they were swimming in air. Marcus worked as a peacekeeper, though his job was nothing like the old police from ancient times. When people had problems, he helped them talk through their feelings. When communities disagreed, he brought them together for long discussions until everyone felt heard and understood. Violence was so rare that most humans had never seen it happen in real life. The communication device on his wrist made a soft sound. A message appeared in the air in front of him, written in flowing letters of light. It was from the Galactic Council, the group that helped different alien species work together across the stars. "Greetings, peaceful humans," the message said. "The Zephyrians need help with a trade dispute. Your wisdom in bringing people together is needed once again." Marcus smiled. This was the kind of work humans were known for throughout the galaxy. Other species came to them when they needed someone to help solve problems without fighting. The humans were famous for being the most peaceful people among the stars. Some aliens even called them naive, but Marcus did not mind. Being naive was better than being violent. He walked to the transport center where a ship waited to take him to the Zephyrian homeworld. The ship was beautiful, made of materials that looked like white silk, but were stronger than any metal. It had no weapons, because humans had no need for such things. The idea of hurting another living being was so foreign to modern humans that their language barely had words for it anymore. As the ship lifted into space, Marcus looked down at his world. New Eden was perfect in every way. The oceans were clean and blue. The continents were covered in cities that looked like gardens. The polar regions had been turned into vast art projects that could be seen from orbit, patterns of ice and light that told the story of human growth and learning. But Marcus did not know the full story of how this peace had been achieved. The history books told of a great transformation 3,000 years ago, when humanity chose to evolve beyond its violent nature. What they did not say was how that transformation really happened. In the deep archives beneath the oldest cities, hidden in places only a few people could access, were the real records. They told a different story. They spoke of a choice that had been made in humanity's darkest hour, when the species had been on the edge of destroying itself with wars and hatred. The leaders of that time had found a solution, but it came with a terrible price. They had identified every human who carried the genes for aggression, every person who still felt the old urges to fight and dominate. These people, millions of them, had been gathered from across human space. But they were not killed or imprisoned. Instead, they were given a choice. They could stay and be changed, their violent nature removed through genetic therapy and mind conditioning. Or they could leave, taking ships and supplies to worlds beyond the edge of the galaxy, places so far away that they would never be found. Most chose to leave. They called themselves the exiled, and they took with them all of humanity's weapons, all the knowledge of war, and all the anger that the peaceful humans wanted to forget. The remaining humans then changed themselves, removing the capacity for violence from their bodies and minds. This was the secret that created the peaceful garden of human space. Peace was possible because all the dangerous humans had been sent away. The ship carrying Marcus reached its destination. He spent the next few days helping the Zephyrians solve their trade problem. It was simple work for him. He listened to both sides, helped them understand each other's needs, and guided them to an agreement that made everyone happy. The Zephyrians were grateful, as aliens always were when humans helped them. Their leader, a tall being with silver skin and large eyes, spoke to Marcus before he left. "Your people are truly blessed," the alien said. "To have evolved beyond the need for conflict is remarkable. We wish we could be as peaceful as humans." Marcus felt proud as he returned to his ship. But as he traveled back to human space, his communication device began receiving strange signals. Emergency messages were coming from the outer colonies, the human settlements that were farthest from Earth. The first message was from New Harmony, a world where humans grew food for many other colonies. The message was short and frightened. "Something is coming from dark space. Our sensor stations are going silent one by one. We need help." More messages followed, each one more desperate than the last. "Unknown ships approaching. They are huge. They do not respond to communication." Then, "They are attacking. This is not a raid. They are destroying everything." Marcus felt something he had never experienced before. His heart was beating fast and his hands were shaking. The peaceful humans had no word for what he was feeling, but in the old language it would have been called fear. By the time his ship reached the outer edge of human space, 3 colonies had gone completely silent. The last transmission from New Harmony was just screaming, then nothing. Marcus and millions of other humans watched their sensor screens in confusion and horror. Something was coming through their space like a storm, destroying everything in its path. The beautiful worlds they had built over thousands of years were being erased from existence. The human leaders called emergency meetings. They tried to make contact with whatever was attacking them. They offered to talk, to trade, to give anything the attackers might want. But there was no response except destruction. For the first time in 3,000 years, humans realized they might need to fight, but they had forgotten how. They had no weapons, no soldiers, no knowledge of war. They were like children who had wandered into a forest full of wolves. As more worlds died, the truth became clear. The peaceful garden that humanity had built was about to be destroyed, and the gentle, wise humans who had created it had no way to protect it. In the deepest archives, in the most secret places, old machines began to wake up. Machines that had not been used for 3,000 years. Machines that knew how to send messages to places beyond the edge of the galaxy, to the worlds where the exiled had gone so long ago. The time had come to call them home. The thing that came from the darkness between galaxies had no name that living beings could understand. The few survivors who escaped its path called it the Devourer, because that was what it did. It ate everything. Stars, planets, entire civilizations disappeared into its endless hunger. It was not one creature but millions, maybe billions, all connected by a single mind that stretched across space. Each part looked like a machine, but machines built by something that understood both technology and flesh in ways that normal life could not imagine. They moved through space in clouds so vast they blocked out stars, leaving only cold emptiness behind them. The Devourer had been traveling for millions of years, crossing the dark space between galaxies. It had consumed whole star systems before any of the current civilizations had even learned to make fire. Now it had found a new galaxy, full of young species that had never faced anything like it. The first to die were the Corythians, a proud warrior race that controlled 50 star systems. Their ships were fast and their weapons were strong. They had never lost a battle against any enemy they had fought. When their sensors detected the approaching swarm, they prepared for what they thought would be just another war. The Corythian fleet met the Devourer at the edge of their space. 10,000 warships, each one capable of destroying a moon, opened fire with everything they had. Energy beams that could melt planets struck the enemy swarm. Nuclear weapons that could crack worlds exploded among the machine creatures. For a moment, it seemed like the attack was working. Thousands of the machine beings were destroyed, their pieces floating in space like metal snow. The Corythian admiral sent a message to his fleet. The enemy bleeds. Press the attack. But then the destroyed machines began to move again. The pieces came together, rebuilding themselves from their own wreckage. What had seemed like victory became horror as the Corythians realized their enemy could not be killed in any normal way. The counterattack was swift and terrible. The machine swarm surrounded the Corythian fleet like water flowing around rocks. Each ship was covered by hundreds of the creatures, which began tearing the vessels apart, piece by piece. The proud warriors inside fought bravely, but their weapons meant nothing against an enemy that could repair any damage instantly. Within 6 hours, the entire Corythian fleet was gone. Not destroyed, but absorbed. The machines had taken every piece of metal, every drop of fuel, every bit of technology. Even the bodies of the crew were consumed, their biological matter processed and added to the swarm. The Devourer moved on to the Corythian homeworld. The planet's defenses were strong. Energy shields protected the cities. Underground bunkers could hold millions of people safe from orbital bombardment. The Corythians had planned for every kind of attack they could imagine. They had not planned for this. The machine swarm did not bombard the planet, instead it landed. Billions of the creatures descended like rain, covering every inch of the world's surface. They began to eat, not just the cities or the people, but everything. The very ground disappeared into their mouths. The oceans were drained. The atmosphere was sucked away. In 3 days, where the Corythian homeworld had been, there was only empty space. Not even dust remained. The news of what happened to the Corythians spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Every species with the ability to travel between stars heard the story and felt the same cold fear. If the mighty Corythians could be wiped out so easily, what hope did anyone else have? Some civilizations tried to run. They loaded their ships with as many people as they could save and fled to the furthest edges of the galaxy. But the Devourer was everywhere now, moving through space faster than any normal ship could travel. The refugees found only more death waiting for them. Others tried to fight. The Hegemony of Worlds, an alliance of 12 different species, gathered the largest fleet in galactic history. They had weapons that the Corythians had never dreamed of, devices that could make stars explode, bombs that could tear holes in space itself. The battle lasted for days. The Allied fleet fought with desperate courage, knowing that the survival of their entire galaxy depended on stopping the Devourer here. They inflicted damage that would have destroyed any normal enemy 1,000 times over. But the Devourer was not normal. Every machine that was destroyed was replaced by 10 more. Every weapon that was used against it was studied, understood, and made useless. The swarm learned from every attack, becoming stronger and smarter with each passing hour. The end came when the machines began to copy the Allied weapons. Suddenly, the fleet found itself under attack by its own technology, turned against them, by an enemy that could remake any tool to serve its purpose. The proud alliance that had taken centuries to build was devoured in a single day. As the Devourer moved deeper into the galaxy, panic began to spread. Entire star systems fell silent as their populations either fled or were consumed. Trade stopped. Communications networks failed as relay stations were eaten. The careful order that had held galactic civilization together for thousands of years began to collapse. It was then that the swarm reached human space. The first human colony to encounter the Devourer was called Haven. It was a peaceful world where artists and poets lived, creating beautiful works that were shared across human space. The colonists had no weapons stronger than tools for cutting down trees. When the black ships appeared in their sky, they did what humans always did. They tried to talk. The colony's leader, an elderly woman named Sarah Kim, sent a message to the approaching swarm. Her voice was calm and kind, the voice of someone who had spent her whole life solving problems through understanding. "Welcome to Haven," she said. "We are humans and we come in peace. We do not know who you are or what you want, but we would like to help. Please let us talk." There was no answer. The machine swarm descended on Haven like a plague of metal locusts. The colonists tried to understand what was happening even as their world was torn apart around them. They had no concept of pure destruction, no experience with enemies that could not be reasoned with. Sarah Kim's final message was broadcast across human space. In it, she was still trying to negotiate even as the machines tore down her city. Please, she said, her voice breaking as explosions echoed behind her. There must be something we can offer you. Some way we can coexist. We just want to live in peace. The transmission ended when the colony's power grid was consumed. 12 human worlds died in the first week. Each one fell the same way, with the peaceful colonists trying to communicate until the very end. The humans sent diplomatic ships to make contact with the Devourer. The ships were swallowed without even slowing the swarm down. The human leaders met in emergency session on Earth. They were scholars and philosophers, people who had spent their lives studying the beauty of existence. They had no knowledge of war, no understanding of enemies that could not be reached through wisdom and compassion. What do they want? Asked the chief cultivator, an ancient man whose family had helped build the peaceful society. Everyone wants something. There must be a way to give them what they need without violence. But Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of the few humans who studied old history, had a different opinion. She had spent years reading the forbidden archives, learning about the time before peace. She knew things that other humans had forgotten. They do not want anything, she said quietly. They are not like us. They do not think like living beings. They exist only to consume, and we have no way to stop them. The other leaders looked at her in shock. The idea that a problem could not be solved through peaceful means was almost unthinkable to them. There must be a way, the chief cultivator insisted. Violence is never the answer. Our ancestors proved that 3,000 years ago when they chose peace over war. Dr. Vasquez stood up slowly. She was older than she looked, one of the few humans who remembered the real history. She walked to a wall panel and placed her hand on it. Hidden systems activated, systems that had been sleeping for 3 millennia. Our ancestors did not choose peace over war, she said. They chose to send war away. And now it is time to call it back. Deep beneath the earth, in chambers that no living human had entered for 3,000 years, ancient machines began to wake up. Transmitters that could send messages across impossible distances powered up for the first time since the exile. The signals they sent traveled beyond the edge of the galaxy, to worlds that peaceful humanity had tried to forget. The message was simple. Your children are dying. Come home. Commander Elena Voss stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching the stars that were not stars. Beyond the edge of the galaxy, in the cold dark between stellar islands, her people had built something that the peaceful core worlds could never imagine. These were not the gentle humans who grew flowers and wrote poetry. These were the children of humanity's rage, and they had spent 3,000 years becoming perfect at what they did best. The signal reached them as Elena was reviewing the battle reports from the frontier wars. Her people had been fighting the Void Stalkers for 6 months, creatures from even deeper in the dark that had thought the human colony worlds would be easy prey. They had been wrong. The Stalkers were extinct now, their hunting packs turned into floating scrap metal around a dozen dead worlds. Commander, called Tech Sergeant Morrison from his station. His face was covered in scars from the last war, and half of his body had been replaced with machines that made him stronger and faster than any normal human. We are getting something on the ancient channels. The deep transmitters. Elena felt her blood go cold. The deep transmitters had been silent for 3,000 years. They were the emergency link to the home galaxy, to the soft humans who had cast her ancestors out into the darkness. If they were broadcasting now, something terrible was happening. Put it through, she ordered. The message was short and desperate. A woman's voice speaking words that no human in the core galaxy had ever needed to say before. Your children are dying. Come home. Elena stood silent for a long moment. Around her, the bridge crew waited. These were hard people, shaped by generations of war in the deep dark. They had been born for battle, raised on stories of the Great Exile, trained from childhood to be humanity's sword and shield. But they were still human, and the voice in that message was calling to something deeper than their warrior nature. Signal. The fleet, Elena said finally. All ships, all commanders, we are going home. The order spread across the Revenant fleet like wildfire. Ships that had been scattered across 100 systems began to gather at the rally point. They came from battles with machine intelligences that had tried to claim human space. They came from wars with alien species that had thought exiled humans would be weak. They came from the deep exploration missions that had mapped the territory between galaxies. Each ship was a weapon of war beyond anything the peaceful galaxy had ever seen. The humans of the outer dark had not spent 3,000 years growing gardens. They had spent that time learning to kill things that should not be able to die. Their ships were built for war against enemies that normal beings could not even imagine. The retribution itself was the size of a small moon, its hull black as the space between stars. Weapons covered every surface, devices that could crack planets or turn suns into bombs. The ship's heart was a contained singularity, a black hole held in chains of force that powered weapons that bent the laws of physics. But it was not the largest ship in the fleet. That honor belonged to the Wrath of Terra, Elena's flagship and the mobile home of the Revenant Legion. The ship was so large that smaller vessels docked inside its hull like parasites in a whale's belly. Its weapons could destroy solar systems, and its armor had been forged from matter taken from the cores of dead stars. Admiral Marcus Stone stood on the Wrath's bridge, a man who had been fighting wars since before some civilizations had discovered fire. He was old beyond normal human lifespan, kept alive by machines and genetic therapy that let him think and react faster than any unmodified person could manage. Scars covered his face and hands, marks from battles against things that the core galaxy would dismiss as impossible. "How many ships do we have?" he asked his aide, a young woman who had been born in the deep dark and had never seen a world where peace was possible. 15,000 combat vessels, she reported. 3 million Revenant Marines, 500 deep strike teams, and the Omega Fleet. Marcus nodded. The Omega Fleet was their ultimate weapon, ships so dangerous that they were only used when entire species needed to be wiped from existence. Each Omega ship carried weapons that could make stars go nova, or devices that could fold space itself into knots that would tear apart anything caught inside. "Signal Commander Voss," Marcus ordered. "Tell her we are ready to move." The message reached Elena as she finished reading the intelligence reports from the core galaxy. The situation was worse than the emergency signal had suggested. Something called the Devourer was eating its way through civilized space, destroying everything in its path. Entire species were going extinct in days. Even the mighty warrior races were falling without putting up meaningful resistance. Elena smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Her ancestors had been called monsters by the peaceful humans. They had been cast out because their very existence reminded the core worlds that humanity was capable of terrible things. Well, now the core worlds were going to remember why monsters were sometimes necessary. "All ships," she broadcast to the fleet. "We are going home to save people who threw us away 3,000 years ago, people who called us evil because we were willing to do what they could not. Some of you might wonder why we should help them." She paused, looking out at the stars that marked the edge of the galaxy where she had been born. "We help them because they are still human, because they are our children, even if they hate what we are, and because when something threatens humanity, we do not ask if those humans deserve to live. We just kill whatever is threatening them." The fleet began to move. 15,000 ships, each one a weapon that could fight wars against entire civilizations. They accelerated toward the galaxy at speeds that normal physics said were impossible, powered by engines that burned dark matter and used the force of collapsing dimensions for fuel. As they traveled, the Revenants prepared for war. In the weapon bays, soldiers checked equipment that had been designed to fight enemies beyond normal comprehension. Plasma rifles that could melt through neutronium armor, gravity hammers that could crush tanks into marble-sized spheres, personal shields that could deflect the force of supernovas. But the most important preparations were not about weapons. In the deep chambers of the command ships, the Revenants performed the old rituals. They painted their faces with the symbols of their ancestors. They spoke the names of the humans who had died in the exile, remembering those who had sacrificed everything so that their children could be strong enough to protect the weak. "We are the sword that cuts the darkness," they chanted together. "We are the shield that guards the light. We are the monsters that hunt monsters so that innocents can sleep in peace." Elena stood in her private chambers, looking at an image that few revenants were allowed to see. It was a picture of Earth, taken 3,000 years ago before the exile. Green and blue and beautiful, the home that her people had been cast out from but had never stopped loving. Her grandmother had given her that picture, and her grandmother's grandmother before that. Every generation of revenants had carried the memory of home, even as they were transformed into something that home would fear. They had become monsters so that Earth could remain a garden. "We are coming," Elena whispered to the image. "We are coming home." Behind her, through the great windows of her ship, the galaxy grew larger as the fleet approached. Soon they would be home again, these children of humanity's darkest nature. Soon the galaxy would remember that humans were capable of more than peace and philosophy. Soon the Devourer would learn why humanity had survived long enough to evolve into angels. It was because they had never really stopped being demons. The Revenant fleet crossed into the home galaxy like a tide of black steel and burning vengeance. They had come home to save the children who had cast them out. And they would not stop until every threat to humanity was nothing but dust floating in the darkness of space. The peaceful humans, who had built a garden among the stars, were about to discover what their flowers had cost. They were about to meet the thorns that had kept the garden safe. The first sign that something had changed was the silence. For 3 days, the Devourer had been moving through human space like a plague, consuming world after world without pause. Then suddenly it stopped. The vast machine swarm that had been unstoppable simply halted its advance and began to gather in empty space as if waiting for something. The peaceful humans watched their sensors in confusion. The Devourer had been in the middle of consuming the colony world of New Bethlehem when it suddenly pulled back, leaving the half-eaten planet spinning alone in the dark. Emergency broadcasts from the dying world were cut short as the machines withdrew, but not because the colony was completely destroyed. The survivors were left alive, abandoned in the ruins of their cities. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the command center on Earth, studying the readings that made no sense. "It is like they detected something," she said to the other leaders around her. "Something that made them change their behavior completely." The chief cultivator looked pale and frightened. 3,000 years of peace had not prepared him for the reality of total war. "Maybe they are retreating. Maybe they have decided to leave us alone." But Elena knew better. She had studied the old records, the ones that told the real story of how human peace had been achieved. She understood what the emergency signal had awakened in the darkness beyond the galaxy's edge. "They are not retreating," she said quietly. "They are preparing to fight something else." The answer came 12 hours later, when the deep space sensors detected something approaching from the galactic rim. Ships were coming, moving faster than anything in the known galaxy should be able to travel. The peaceful humans tried to make contact, sending the same diplomatic greetings they had offered to the Devourer. This time, they got an answer. "This is Commander Elena Voss of the Revenant Fleet," the voice said, and every human who heard it felt something cold run down their spine. The voice was human but different, harder, older, dangerous in a way that peaceful humans had forgotten was possible. "We received your signal. We are coming home." The first Revenant ship to emerge from hyperspace was the size of a city. Its hull was black as the void between stars, covered in weapons that hurt to look at directly. The peaceful humans had never seen anything like it. Their own ships were works of art, beautiful and graceful. This thing was pure function, designed for one purpose only: to kill things that needed killing. More ships followed, thousands of them, each one a nightmare of metal and energy that should not have been able to exist. The peaceful humans watched in growing horror as their sensors registered weapons that operated on principles their science said were impossible. These ships carried enough firepower to sterilize galaxies. "Who are they?" whispered the chief cultivator, staring at the fleet that filled the space around Earth like a swarm of mechanical predators. Elena Vasquez closed her eyes. She was one of the few humans alive who knew the truth about the exile. "They are us," she said. "They are what we used to be, before we chose to become peaceful." They are the humans we sent away because we were afraid of what we might become if we kept them. The Revenant fleet took position around the human worlds, but they did not land. They did not ask for supplies or medical aid or any of the things that normal people needed after a long journey. They simply waited, watching the approaches to human space with sensors that could detect a single ship from 1,000 light-years away. They did not wait long. The Devourer came like a tide of hunger, billions of machine creatures moving in perfect coordination. They had regrouped and adapted, analyzing the new data about the strange ships that had appeared in their territory. The collective intelligence that controlled them was confident. These new vessels were larger and carried more weapons than anything it had faced before, but they were still just machines. Machines could be consumed and repurposed like everything else. The first contact happened at the edge of human space, where a small group of Devourer scouts encountered a single Revenant patrol ship. The scouts swarmed the human vessel, preparing to tear it apart and absorb its technology as they had done to countless other ships. The human ship did not try to run or call for help. Instead, it turned to face the attacking swarm and opened fire with weapons that defied understanding. Beams of energy that existed in 11 dimensions at once cut through the scout ships like they were made of paper. Gravity mines collapsed, space around clusters of machines, crushing them into points of infinite density. Quantum warheads detonated in explosions that existed in multiple timelines simultaneously. But the most shocking thing was what happened when the scouts tried to repair themselves. The Revenant weapons did not just destroy matter. They destroyed the information that told matter how to exist. The wreckage of the scout ships could not rebuild because the machines could no longer remember what they were supposed to be. For the first time in millions of years, the Devourer experienced something it had almost forgotten. Surprise. Its scouts were not just destroyed. They were completely eliminated, removed from existence so thoroughly that even their quantum signatures were erased. The collective mind that controlled the swarm turned its full attention to this new threat. If these humans had weapons that could permanently destroy its units, they would need to be eliminated quickly before they could cause serious damage. The full force of the Devourer fell on the human fleet like an avalanche of metal and hunger. Billions of machine creatures swarmed around the 15,000 Revenant ships, blocking out the stars with their numbers. It should have been the end of the human resistance, a brief and violent conclusion to the galaxy's last hope. Instead, it became something that the Devourer's vast intelligence could not comprehend. The human ships did not fight like any enemy it had ever faced. They did not form defensive lines or try to protect their larger vessels. Instead, they charged directly into the swarm, their weapons firing in patterns that seemed random, but somehow always hit exactly the right targets. The Revenants fought like they had been born for this moment because they had been. 3,000 years of war in the deep dark had taught them how to battle enemies that conventional tactics could not touch. They used their ships like weapons, ramming them into clusters of machine creatures and detonating their power cores, to create explosions that tore holes in space itself. But it was not just their technology that made them unstoppable. It was their understanding of sacrifice. When a Revenant ship was overwhelmed, its crew did not surrender or try to escape. They triggered their ship's self-destruct sequence and took as many enemies with them as possible. Death was not something they feared. It was just another weapon in their arsenal. Admiral Marcus Stone watched the battle from the bridge of the Wrath of Terra, his ancient eyes calculating the flow of combat with the skill of someone who had spent lifetimes learning how to kill unkillable things. The Devourer was adapting faster than most enemies, but it was still thinking like a collective intelligence. It expected its opponents to value their own survival above all else. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Begin the Omega Protocol." The Omega fleet, the most dangerous ships in the Revenant Armada, moved into position around the main Devourer force. These vessels carried weapons so terrible that they had never been used in combat before. Planet killers and starbreakers, devices that could unravel the fundamental forces that held matter together. The Omega ships opened fire together, unleashing destruction on a scale that redefined what warfare could be. Stars went nova as their fusion reactions were disrupted. Planets cracked apart as their gravitational fields were inverted. Space itself began to tear as weapons that existed partially outside normal reality carved impossible wounds in the fabric of existence. The Devourers' swarm, which had seemed infinite, began to thin. For every machine creature destroyed, the collective intelligence lost a piece of itself. Its perfect coordination started to break down as critical nodes were eliminated faster than they could be replaced. But the most important moment of the battle was yet to come. As the fighting raged around them, a group of revenant Marines did something that no sane military commander would have ordered. They boarded one of the Devourers' ships. Commander Sarah Chen led her squad through the alien vessel's corridors, fighting hand-to-hand against machine creatures in passages that seemed to exist in more dimensions than normal space allowed. Her Marines were barely human anymore, their bodies modified with technology that let them survive in environments that would kill normal people instantly. They fought with weapons that cut through matter at the atomic level, and when those failed, they used their bare hands. The Marines had been trained to fight against enemies that could not be defeated by conventional means. They were humanity's ultimate predators, designed to hunt things that hunted civilizations. Deep in the heart of the Devourer ship, they found what they were looking for. A control node, the nerve center that coordinated this part of the swarm. Sarah placed her hand on the alien device and activated the virus that Revenant scientists had designed for this moment. The virus did not attack the Devourer's technology. Instead, it attacked its understanding. It filled the collective intelligence with contradictory. The silence after the battle was deeper than any quiet the galaxy had known for 3,000 years. Where the Devourer's main swarm had gathered around Earth, now only debris floated in the darkness. Pieces of machine creatures drifted like metal snow, their collective consciousness shattered and their perfect unity broken forever. Commander Elena Voss stood in the observation deck of the Retribution, looking down at the blue and green world that her ancestors had been forced to leave so long ago. Earth looked exactly as it had in the old pictures passed down through generations of revenants. The peaceful humans had taken good care of their garden world, keeping it beautiful and clean while her people fought wars in the deep dark. "Commander," came a voice behind her. It was Lieutenant Jake Morrison, one of her bridge officers. Half of his face was covered in fresh scars from the battle, and his left arm had been replaced with a mechanical substitute after a Devourer machine had torn the original one off. "The peaceful humans are requesting permission to come aboard. They want to talk." Elena smiled, but it was not a happy expression. She had read the historical records. She knew what had happened during the exile, when her ancestors had been loaded onto ships and sent away. Because their very existence made the peaceful humans uncomfortable, the core worlders had been very polite about it, very civilized. They had explained that violence was no longer needed, that humanity was evolving beyond such primitive behaviors. "Let them come," she said. It is time they met their monsters, face to face. The delegation from Earth arrived in a ship that looked more like a flower than a vessel of war. It was beautiful in the way that peaceful human creations always were, all flowing curves and gentle lights. It docked with the Retribution like a butterfly landing on the hull of a predator. Dr. Elena Vasquez led the group of peaceful humans through the corridors of the Revenant ship. She was one of the few who knew the real history, but even she was not prepared for what she saw. The walls were covered in weapons that her people had no names for. The air itself seemed to hum with barely contained violence. Revenant Marines stood at attention as the delegation passed. These soldiers were barely recognizable as human anymore. Their bodies had been modified for war, enhanced with technology that made them faster, stronger, and deadlier than any normal person could imagine. They looked at the peaceful humans with eyes that had seen the death of civilizations. The meeting took place in the ship's main conference room. Elena Voss sat at one end of a table made from metal taken from the core of a dead star. The peaceful humans sat at the other end, looking small and fragile in their simple clothes. "Thank you for coming to save us," said Dr. Vasquez. She spoke, carefully like someone talking to a dangerous animal. "We owe you our lives." "You owe us nothing," Elena replied. "We did not come here for your gratitude. We came because you are still human, and humans protect their own." The chief cultivator, an elderly man who had spent his whole life believing that peace was always possible, leaned forward. We need to discuss what happens next. The galaxy has seen what your ships can do. Other species are afraid. They think humanity has become a threat. Elena's laugh was cold as the space between stars. They are right to be afraid. We are a threat. We are the most dangerous thing in this galaxy, and we have been for 3,000 years. The only difference is that now, you cannot pretend we do not exist. But we want peace, the chief cultivator insisted. We have built something beautiful here. A civilization without war, without violence. Surely we can find a way to continue that. Your peace was built on our sacrifice, Elena said quietly. You sent us away so you could be pure. You cast out everyone who was willing to do the dark things that sometimes need doing. Well, we did those things. We became the monsters you were afraid of becoming. And now your beautiful civilization exists, because we were willing to be what you could not. She stood up and walked to a wall display that showed images from the Revenant worlds, cities built like fortresses, children learning to fight before they could properly walk, factories that produced weapons capable of killing gods. This is what your peace cost, she said. We built this in the darkness beyond your sight. We became the sword and shield of humanity while you wrote poetry and grew flowers. Every time something threatened human space, we dealt with it. You never knew because we made sure you never had to know. Dr. Vasquez looked horrified. You have been protecting us all this time? Fighting wars we never heard about? The Void, Stalkers, the Machine Prophets, the Entropy Cults. Dozens of species that thought human space would be easy prey because you appeared weak and defenseless. Elena turned back to face them. They were all wrong. You were never defenseless. You just outsourced your defense to us. The room fell silent. The peaceful humans stared at her, trying to understand what she was telling them. They had believed their own story about evolving beyond violence. They had never imagined that their evolution had simply involved pushing violence somewhere else. What do you want from us? Asked the chief cultivator finally. Nothing, Elena said. We want nothing from you except what we have always wanted. To keep you safe. To make sure humanity survives. To be the monsters in the dark so you can be the light. But the other species in the galaxy will not accept that, Dr. Vasquez said. They have seen your power. They know what you are capable of. They will form alliances against us. Elena sat back down, and for the first time since the delegation had arrived, she smiled with genuine warmth. Let them try. We have been preparing for that possibility for 3,000 years. Admiral Marcus Stone chose that moment to enter the conference room. The ancient warrior looked at the peaceful humans like a scientist studying interesting specimens. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries of war. The hegemony of worlds has already begun forming a coalition against humanity, he said. 47 species have signed a mutual defense pact. They plan to strike our colonies before we can expand our influence. The peaceful humans looked terrified. The idea of the entire galaxy turning against them was beyond their worst nightmares. What will we do? Whispered the chief cultivator. Marcus smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. We will do what we always do. We will protect humanity, and we will make sure that anyone who threatens our people regrets that decision. But there are 47 species, Dr. Vasquez said. Billions of ships. How can you fight the entire galaxy? The same way we fought the Devourer, Elena said. The same way we have fought every enemy for 3,000 years. We will be better at war than they are at anything else. Over the following months, the galaxy learned the truth about humanity. The Revenants did not hide their nature anymore. Their black ships patrolled human space openly, and their reputation spread like wildfire through the stars. Stories were told of human marines who could fight machine armies with their bare hands, of human ships that could destroy planets with a single shot, of human commanders who had never lost a battle in 3 millennia of war. The coalition against humanity formed as predicted, but it fell apart just as quickly. The first species to actually attack a human colony was the Carithian Republic, seeking revenge for their homeworld's destruction by the Devourer. They sent a fleet of 5,000 ships to raid the human world of New Geneva. The attack lasted exactly 4 minutes. When it was over, the Corythian fleet was gone, and New Geneva was untouched. The only trace of the battle was a debris field that had once been enemy warships. Admiral Stone had been in the area with a single Revenant cruiser. He had destroyed the entire fleet by himself. The message was clear. Humanity was no longer the peaceful species that other civilizations had taken for granted. They were apex predators who had been hiding their true nature for thousands of years. The coalition dissolved as species after species decided that they had better things to do than fight a war they could not win. But the most important changes happened on the human worlds themselves. For the first time in 3,000 years, the peaceful humans began to learn about their own history. They read the true records of the exile. They learned about the wars that had been fought to protect them. They discovered that their peaceful civilization had been bought with blood that other humans had spilled in the darkness. Some of them were horrified. Some tried to deny what they were learning. But others, especially the younger ones, began to ask questions. They wanted to know how to fight. They wanted to learn how to protect themselves and their families. Elena Voss found herself teaching classes to groups of peaceful humans who had never held a weapon in their lives. She showed them how to shoot, how to fight, how to think like warriors. It was strange work for someone who had spent her life preparing for war among the stars. "Why are you teaching us this?" asked one young woman named Sarah Kim, a descendant of the colony leader who had died trying to negotiate with the Devourer. "I thought you said we should stay peaceful while you protected us." Elena looked at the girl, seeing something in her, eyes that reminded her of her own youth in the deep dark. "Because the galaxy has changed," she said. "Your time of innocence is over. You can choose to remain helpless, or you can choose to become strong, but you cannot choose to remain ignorant."